Welcome to the Family Legacy Podcast, the podcast that goes beyond legal jargon and gets to the root of how to ensure your past, present, and future are protected. This episode is brought to you by the Rutkowski Law Firm, Michigan's leading asset protection, estate planning, Medicaid, and elder law firm. And here's our host, Michael Rutkowski. Michael, how's it going?
It's
Happy
going
Tuesday.
great today, Kerry. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. This is our first episode, folks, so buckle on up. Each week we are going to come to you and answer some of your burning questions as it relates to how to protect your assets and your legacy moving forward. We all have families. We want to make sure that they're taken care of. And what better way to learn than through an expert, an expert like yourself, Michael. So great,
Yeah.
great to have you.
I'm truly excited to be bringing this content because every single week we're meeting with families and questions come up. And, some are the usual typical ones, but other ones kind of come out of left field and they're just great for everyone to know. So I'm just excited to kind of talk together and let people know like what's going on in the estate planning world.
Yeah. And, this is only our first one. So we're just going to take sort of questions that we've had in the field. But I do look forward to people chiming on in. If you're listening and you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we will be sure to have that answered on our next episode. That's what we're here for. We want to answer your questions. So we're going to dive on in. Before we get there, I just want to say, you got a lot going on. Kids are back in school. You just had your 17th year anniversary.
So much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Always so many things going on. Always.
Yeah. So what's top of mind for you right now before we dive in?
Yeah, I know a lot of things. Kids back to school right now. It's been great to get back to a routine at work. Has been just amazing. Personally, I'm always focused on fitness, nutrition, how to be a better dad. Those are kind of a lot of the podcasts that I'm always kind of listening to, along with getting better at my craft too. So, I'm always listening about estate planning, financial planning, because they kind of weave in together. So those are a lot of the things I'm focusing on as we move into kind of our busy season. A lot of families, once kids go back to school, whether it's college age, whatever, kindergarten, we're kind of in planning season again. Everyone took the summer off and it's back into getting our finances restructured, talking about what are we going as, election season's coming up here, what changes on the estate planning side, financial planning side. So there's a lot going on as we move into the fall here. Football.
Oh, who's your team? Gotta know.
That's an interesting one. So being in Michigan, I go both ways. I grew up a University of Michigan fan. My wife and brother went to Michigan State. I feel like my kids are going to go to Michigan, but either way, so I go both ways. Michigan won the national championship last year. That was super fun to watch. This year, it looks like Michigan State might have a go at the competitive Michigan State game.
All right. Well,
we'll see.
Lions
all day. Detroit Lions. Let's go. Super Bowl bound.
I mean, I feel like you can't lose because you have all these teams that all have a shot at making it happen. So,
and it's funny how it goes in waves. Go rewind the clock 5 years ago and we had nothing. I went to Western Michigan. And I was probably rooting for them 5 years ago because all the teams in Michigan weren't doing so well. So it's nice to ride this wave of good teams in Michigan again.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania. We have the Eagles for NHL and the Pittsburgh Steelers if you're on that side of the realm.
Yeah.
And then from a college standpoint, it's really all about Penn State. So we got a few.
Yeah.
We got a few as well. I appreciate having like what ice I put in which basket this week. Although I think my Eagles fans would kill me if they knew I was voting for
for sure.
Pittsburgh.
For sure.
This is awesome. I could hang out with you all day, but we should get to it. People are on the edge of their seat and they want to know, for you and sending the kids back to school, it sounds like guardianship was top of mind and that was where we were going to start. So what does it mean to create a guardianship?
Let's dive into that because I think there's some misconceptions here and people just need to know. One of the most important decisions you'll make as a young parent is who would be the parents of your children if you couldn't be. And a lot of times we just assume like, oh, well, I have siblings, I have parents, like, they'll be taken care of. But the reality is that if something were to happen to you and you couldn't parent your child, whether you've passed away, you become incapacitated, lots of situations could present themselves. You want to have some kind of document that says, what are your wishes when it comes to who would take over? Because how it works in the court system in the US, in Michigan specifically, is there's going to be a court hearing. The family's going to come in. The judge is going to have about 5 minutes to give it a go to try to figure out who's going to be the best fit to be the parents. And then they're on to the next case. And so how in 5 minutes is any judge going to truly understand your family dynamics? I work with families for hours on end, and I don't even scratch the surface to understand, we all have our family dynamics, right? And so just putting it in place, a document, a guardianship appointment document, usually that's contained in a will, but it can be a standalone document to say, hey, if something happens to me and my wife, I want my brother and his wife to do it, or, my sister or my parents or whoever that might be, because otherwise there's a statute in every state that says, what's the order of priority? And that might not be who you want. So it's really important to have this done in advance to say, who's going to be the parents of my kids.
I feel like I remember you saying too, or reading somewhere that it's even if you're separated, like even if it's a short stint and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Well, there's a lot to think about when parenting kids, let alone like the actual parenting of kids. But you have the ability, a lot of people don't know this as well. Like, let's say you're going on a away trip, couples away trip, no kids, and grandparents are watching the kids. You want to sign a temporary delegation of authority document, simple document. It says, I'm granting grandma and grandpa the ability to treat my kid and make parental decisions because I'm gone. They break their leg and they need to go to the hospital. Who's going to be signing off on that? Your caregivers need to have something in place to give them that authority. Otherwise, they can't do it. They can't, in an emergency situation, they don't have the ability. So that's, regardless of the guardianship appointment, it's responsible to put something like that in place. And you do it each time because you can appoint different people. It's for a temporary period of time. So let's say you're going away for a weekend. You just say this document only works Thursday to Monday or whatever you're doing. But something like that is incredibly important so that whoever you're entrusting your kids with while you're gone can do anything you could have done if you were there. So that's another
Okay,
really
and those,
important thing parents need to be thinking about.
and just to be clear, those are two different things. So you have the
Two,
guardianship,
yeah,
somebody takes over permanently, and
yeah.
then a
So yeah, so
delegation form.
if you work with our office, essentially how our process would work is we'd get an estate plan in place. We'd have guardianship appointments. Now there's two things to think about. There's a temporary guardianship and permanent guardianship. So let's just hypothetically say something happens today. We want someone to be able to take custody of our children for a short period of time until a judge puts that final guardianship in place. And that may not be the same person, depending on geographical location of, maybe your siblings are out of state and they're who you want to take the kids, but mom and dad are close and they need to be able to make decisions for the next 2 weeks. So there's a temporary guardian and then there's a permanent guardian. Lots of times it's the same people, sometimes it's not. But through the estate planning process, we'd have that all documented and laid out. But also the families would get a couple of these delegation of parental rights forms so that they have those on standby, and then they can just fill them out as needed. They can either swing by our office at bank or anything to have them properly notarized, but those would give, your caretakers for that short period of time the ability to act if something came up.
Okay, so just as an example, when I was living in Seattle and we didn't have any family near us, if I if something happened to me and my husband, I may have needed a short-term guardianship in place for like our very best friends down the road to take the kids until like my mom, who
Yeah.
would have who
Yeah. I
essentially
mean,
was the
your
okay.
situation just begs for this because you don't even have family nearby. Because sometimes, they'll hand the police or whoever will hand off to a next of kin or a family member just as we're sorting this all out. But if you have no family nearby, what's going to happen until mom gets in town? You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
that would be
scary.
a really important document.
Let's talk about the process. So, if you wanted a guardianship, does it have to go with a big estate plan as well, or a trust plan, or can it
Yeah,
just be
yeah,
a
great question.
standalone?
Typically the guardianship appointment, so picking who you want to take your kids, would happen inside of a will. Um, Now you might end up doing trust planning, but even if you're doing trust planning, there'll still be that will for that guardianship appointment because that has to happen through court order. So under a will or a standalone document will be that guardianship appointment because it has to actually go through the court system to be finalized. A court has to approve it. They do have the ability to, if someone else, maybe even your kid, because at the age of 14, a child has a lot of say in like who they want to take care of them. So you might actually have a guardianship appointment in place, but if your kid is 16, over 14, they have the ability to come to the court and say, "Hey, really, I know my parents wanted my uncle and aunt over here, but I get along so much better, and here are the reasons why I want to be with this aunt and uncle or these people or whatever." They can present their case as to why maybe it should deviate a little bit from what the parents chose.
Wow, that's big responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. So there's lots going on here. I mean, this is
Yeah.
why it's so important to not only have the guardianship appointment in place, but have these conversations as a family. I can't tell you how many families kind of just they don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about death. So we don't talk about these things because some people think if you talk about it, it's going to happen. But you need to have these conversations because the planning only goes so far, but if everyone is on the same page, it just works so much more smoothly. Zoom has just been an absolute blessing for estate planning because now when we're working with families and we got a son in Colorado and a daughter in California, we're all jumping on the Zoom call and everyone is a part of the planning. They know what's going on. They know where to reach us in the event of an emergency. That has changed the landscape of estate planning in such a great way. Not a lot of things that came out of COVID on the positive, but this was one of them for sure. For sure.
Definitely. I didn't even think of that in terms of having people multiple states and being able to bring them together to plan. I think that's so important, especially when you're talking about guardianship and
Yeah.
how to move kids from one place to another and what the plan's going to be for that. So that leads to my next question in terms of, well, it's twofold. The first part of it is, what is a guardian even um what are their rights and responsibilities as a guardian taking over?
And now, Kerry, we could do this all day. How long do you want to do this? I mean, we could go for hours. I love it. Essentially, when you're putting in place a guardianship, that guardian does not have personal responsibility as long that we get asked this all the time because we work with not only for minors. I know we're really focused on minors here today, but we work with a lot of incapacitated individuals as the result of the aging process. Guardians always want to know, like, what am I personally responsible for if I take on this job? And as long as you're acting in the best interest of the individual, there's no personal responsibility here. Let's throw some terms out there that we need to define, though, because they kind of get thrown around. There's a guardian and there's a conservator. The guardian takes care of the physical well-being of the person, and the conservator takes care of the money side of things. So, okay, so we got those two in play. Usually for adult incapacitated individuals, we're usually getting both appointed, guardian and conservator. Minors don't really have anything yet. So that might be a trustee that's managing some funds for things like school and medical and all that. And the guardian's just doing the everyday stuff. You don't need a conservator to manage the lunch money. It's just really like larger assets. So
Sure.
usually for a minor, it's just a guardian, but no personal responsibility there, but they're essentially the parent of the child. So it's going to be on them to make sure that they're getting proper schooling, proper, if they're not, if a parent could get in trouble for something, the guardian could get in trouble for the same thing, if that makes sense. You're
Yeah,
actually taking on that role as parent guardian. It's a lot.
that is a lot. How do you choose? So how do you choose who your
There's a lot
guardian's
of
going to be?
factors, I don't have a right answer for you on this. I'll just tell you what I hear people discussing when we're picking. A lot of times there's some geographical situations we're talking about. It's studies have shown that it's best for a child to maintain as much status quo as possible in tragic events where, like, let's say parents were in a car accident or something. So we're kind of thinking through, okay, who would be best to kind of leave the kids in the same school system? We don't want to uproot them and move them. I'm in Michigan. We don't want to move them to Florida or something like that. So those are a lot of times like what people would provide the most similar school system relationships. You don't want to uproot them from their friends, as much stability as possible if something were to actually happen. So that goes into it a lot. A lot of times I hear people talking about the responsibility level of their siblings. So, sometimes they're like, well, these siblings, they're like, financially more, savvy and they're savers and they parent like we do. And then they're like, oh, my other siblings, not a chance, right? So those are the things they kind of look to, like, who are most similar to us as parents and parenting style. That happens a lot. I see a lot of people when they're having young kids, they'll first choose parents as guardian conservator, and then later as their siblings mature, they might move the siblings. But know this also, you can also have backups appointed too. See, I told you, we can just keep going forever on this.
This is good.
When you do the appointment, you can have a backup in the event, let's say you appoint mom and dad today, and your kids are 2 and 4. And 10 years down the road, mom and dad now are like 75. And they're like, this is just way too much for us. So they can tap out and say, appreciate the thought, but we're going to pass and go to the next people. And maybe, in the documents, we have the siblings as backup. Another thing you need to think about is, could one of them act alone? Like, okay, I'm appointing my mom and dad, but there's no way my dad could do this by himself. My mom could do it. My mom could handle this all by herself. So in the document, we'd say my mom and dad, or my mom alone, but not a chance, that my dad could do this. So not happening for my dad. Not happening for my dad. So those, you can see there's just like a lot that goes into thinking this through. And that's where really our job as attorneys to counsel families through this, to help them make these decisions. In anything that we do, we usually are working through the families with like how to process this and think about it. Okay, go away, think about it, talk about it as a family. Let's get back together and make those final decisions. Because it's a lot. It'd be a lot to make all of that in just one meeting. So usually when you're working through the process with us, it's usually anywhere between, call it 4 and 6 meetings we like to break it up into little chunks so that it's a little bit to think about. Let's figure out where our assets going today. And then next time, let's talk about who's going to manage this all and our minor kids. And there's a lot that goes into all this, for sure.
There is a lot. 2 final questions. I know we could do this all day, and maybe we'll do a part 2, or maybe you have your own questions and you could pop those over to us and we look forward to potentially answering them. I want to first talk about, when you're 14 or over, you have some say on where you would like to go based off of what your parents have requested. But what about if you're younger? Do we as parents need to be sitting around? You said that there should be a lot of conversation that's going on. So is it appropriate for me to sit down with my 8-year-olds and have this conversation of, okay, let's talk about this. If something's to happen to me, and dad, we want to make sure you're taken care of, and here's what we're thinking about. How do you feel about that? I mean, that feels like, that feels big.
That does feel big.
Feels big.
And that's hard to say. It really is. I think every family is a little bit different on what they want to talk about, and we work with every extreme, from like a couple doing planning that they don't want a person to know about anything and keep it very private, to the family that literally everyone's on the call. We get on a Zoom call and it's the Brady Bunch. We've got the whole screen going, and that's cool too. I think every family dynamic is a little bit different. I think at minimum with this appointment, trustee and stuff is a little bit different. Someone could pass, and it's just, you can delegate a lot too in a trustee role. You can hire attorneys and CPAs to help with it all. In this role, it's probably appropriate to have that conversation. Hey, siblings, if something were to happen to us, would you guys be open to being the guardians of our kids? I think that's fair. If you're not really in the mood to have that conversation, then I would just put a lot of backups, because give those people the ability to say no.
Well, I also imagine that if they say yes today, 10 years down the line, their circumstances could change. So having
Yeah,
backups regardless is probably a good
yeah,
idea.
yep.
Yeah,
In everything we do, we like to have at least 2 to 3 backups.
I think
Because you
that makes
never know.
sense.
A lot of families, as much as we want to meet with families every 3 to 5 years just to see what's changed in their life, a lot of times estate planning is kind of a set it and forget it thing for most people. I did it, we're covered, put it in the top shelf in the closet, and let's not think about that again.
That box
So
has been checked.
yeah, so we try to do planning with as much what ifs to say, okay, even if this plan isn't executed for 30 years, like, would this still make sense? And then obviously, once the kids age out, the guardianship stuff just falls off. If once the kids get past 18, then
That
then
doesn't
all of
matter.
that falls off. All that
That
falls
makes
off.
sense.
Yeah. And so when we're working with younger families, probably, like I started in this conversation, the most important things that families are going to make, who are the guardians of the kids? And usually we should be structuring a trust to say, how do we want to structure the distribution of assets and not just give it all to them early, right? Because I know for me, if like my kids were to get any money right now, life insurance proceeds, whatever, it's iPad games all day. They love, they wouldn't save for college, retirement, nothing. iPad
Joke
games
about
all
the
day.
whole day.
So putting something in place that says, they can have it for health, education, maintenance, and support until age 25. Let them mature a little bit. It can be used for college and all those things, a down payment on a house, whatever you want to set up. So those are probably the 2 most important tips that I can give for parents with minor kids.
I think we should come back to we'll circle back, folks, on the
Yeah, let's do that.
trust planning as it relates to this, because I have so many questions. It'll be good.
Yeah, for
Before we
sure.
close out, I do want to know what happens if you don't have this in place. I know this is really scary to think about, but I think it's important for us
Yeah.
to understand.
Yeah. So it gets wrapped into the probate court. And so most families are coming to us with a wide variety of issues, but main objective most times is to keep it out of the court system. Because here in the US, it's time consuming and expensive. Usually you're looking, especially in a decedent estate, meaning someone's passed away with no plan in place and it has to go through probate, you're going to end up spending anywhere between 5 and 10% of the assets just to get it transferred through probate. But not only that, everything's locked up for anywhere between 9 and 18 months. So it just is very problematic. People want to avoid all that. So usually we're doing some type of planning to keep things out of the court system. In a guardianship case, there's delays that happen all the time with guardianships. You're probably not going to get in front of a judge for at least a month. So there's that month time frame where no one can make decisions for these minors. Who are they going to live with? These minors are in like limbo of like, who am I going to live with and how is this all going to work? And all interested parties receive notice that there's going to be a hearing on, call it whatever, January 5th. Everyone come to court and you can tell us why you should be guardian of these kids. And then the judge gets to figure it out in 5 minutes. That's kind of how it goes down. It's kind of how it goes down. So, having these documents in place, it's more of just the judge stamping their approval on what you picked versus talking to the whole family about who should do this.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go get a guardianship put in place immediately.
Yeah.
So important. Thank you so much, Michael. If you liked this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any questions, as I mentioned, please email us at
MLR at RutkowskiLawFirm.com.
RutkowskiLawFirm.com. I always get those letters reversed.
Yeah,
I will get this right.
We're gonna put that either below or however that works. You'll see.
Yes.
You'll see how to get in touch.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Or you could always head to the website and give us a call. Either way, we are here for you. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.
Take care.